Thank you very much. It's wonderful to spend some time with you all this afternoon. I'd like to thank Lab Miami and the organizers and all of the staff for running such a wonderful event today. I think it's amazing to see the confluence of technologies that are really ushering in some profound change on the logistics industry. It's also awesome to be in Miami, if just for the weather alone. I come from Toronto, Canada, where it was snowing when I left. Do we have any other Canadians here by chance? We do. Awesome. Awesome. How's it going, eh? My name is Brent Lessard. I'm a mechanical engineer. And several years ago, I co-founded an organization that's focused on engineering, research, and development. And I'd like to talk a little bit about the work that we've done, but I'd also like to touch on some innovations that we think are going to have some profound impact in the near future. There we go. Okay, and the first is some recurring themes to my talk. The first is this idea of innovation as a resource, and I truly think of it as a limitless resource, right? We face many challenges today, from a global down to a local scale, but we've faced and overcome similar and seemingly dire challenges before. And we have this unique capability as humans, when we're confronted with a challenge, that we're absolutely driven to solve it. And we innovate and create technologies to solve these challenges. And when these innovations come online, they require us to change our behavior, right? We change the way that we personally act, we change the way that we interact, and in some cases, our moral and ethical frameworks may actually have to shift. And this new reality then presents us with its own set of challenges and problems that we need to solve. And this cycle has generally been true historically, and I think it will remain true, but what has changed is the pace of acceleration with exponential growth in technologies, and actually there's exponential growth to exponential growth. And we have this cognitive inability really to grasp and understand exponential growth. And when we're confronted with such rapid change, the natural reaction is anxiety and fear. And you see this in the media, and you see this in pop culture with these dystopian portrayals of the future. But I think I'm really excited about the opportunities that these new technologies will enable us, and I think there's good reason for you to be excited as well. And one of these innovations is the blockchain technology. And I know we had an awesome panel here just a couple hours ago, but I usually like to poll the audience and see, show of hands, who's heard of blockchain technology before? Right, just about everybody, and that's a change actually from a year or two ago. Many people weren't even familiar with it. But of those of you who are familiar with it, who would say that they really understand blockchain? Right, little to no. And you know, I myself wouldn't claim to really have a deep understanding of blockchain tech. And for those of you who do, this may be a little bit of a simplified overview, but for the context of the talk, I'd like to give an overview. So when we use the internet today, we are able to create, manage, and share information. But when you send that information, what you're actually sending is a copy, right? So if I send an email, I can send it to 100 people. They're all receiving copies of that email. And the same goes for any website or any knowledge you might gain through a Google search or on Wikipedia. And actually, that's a very profound aspect of the internet, that we can generate and disseminate vast amounts of information quickly and cheaply. And actually, the more people that information touches, the more valuable it becomes. But, by the way, do we have any IT crowd fans? Nobody gets the reference? Okay, good. But when we're talking about items of value, like assets or money, being able to send a copy is a horrible idea. And I think the reason for that is self-evident, but For example, if I had gone for some karaoke and beer with Hans last night, and I owed him $20 for my tab, he wants to be sure that the $20 that he receives is the only version of that $20, or is the original version, and that he's not receiving a copy, and that I can use that copy of that $20 to pay off another tab, or to give to everybody in the room. While that may earn me some favors, it ultimately renders the value of that money worthless. So the ability to copy and send information is good. The ability to copy and send money is bad. By the way, if anybody wants a copy of these slides, you can send me an email and I'd be happy to send you a copy. So this is a problem actually that we've been working on for many years, and it's known as the double spend problem. And what we've traditionally relied on is third-party intermediaries like banks or brokers who would essentially stand between two or more parties wishing to interact. They would establish the trust, they would perform the business logic, they'd update the records, and generally they do a very good job of this, but they have their own limitations as well, right? They are centralized, and that represents potential vulnerabilities. We've seen some notable data breaches over the past couple years. It also introduces a potential for conflicts of interest. They introduce cost to the transaction, and they introduce friction, right? I can send thousands of copies of these slides around the world in a matter of seconds, but try sending value online, and you're looking at days, or in some cases, weeks. And so the blockchain comes along, and it really represents a new era for the internet, from an internet of information to an internet of value. And the blockchain essentially is a globally distributed ledger or database, but instead of those records being held in centralized servers at a corporation or a bank, every computer that's connected to the network has a copy of those records. And now we can establish trust not through a third-party intermediary, but the network itself can establish trust through collaboration, consensus, and code. And a show of hands, who here has heard of Bitcoin before? I'm just kidding, everybody's heard of Bitcoin. So Bitcoin was actually released 10 years ago by an anonymous person or group named Satoshi Nakamoto, and it was designed to do one thing, to be peer-to-peer cash, or money for the internet that could be sent without the need for a third-party intermediary. And it presented this unique solution to that double spend problem, and it did it so well that it sparked this explosion of interest, and Bitcoin became the mother of all blockchains and cryptocurrencies. Who here has heard of Ethereum? Great. Any of my fellow Canadians should know Ethereum was actually founded in my hometown of Toronto by a 19-year-old computer science student named Vitalik Buterin. Ethereum was a more generalized platform, and it allowed you to run what they called smart contracts. They're essentially applications that run exactly as they're programmed, with no chance for downtime, censorship, fraud, or interference of any kind. And Bitcoin, or a currency, is just one type of application that you could build on the Ethereum network. But as it's more generalized, it allows you to do so much more. And so again, we see this cycle where we're presented with this challenge presented by third-party intermediaries being centralized, introducing cost and friction. We innovate and create a new solution in the blockchain, and that fundamentally changes our ability to interact. So what we're talking about now is the ability to digitize all of the world's assets and to manage them in a trustless environment, and actually for organizations or corporations to exist in code alone with no physical domicile. So Ronald Coase was a British economist, and he actually won the Nobel Peace Prize for his work on the nature of the firm. he identified one primary reason that we have these corporate structures, and that's to lower transaction costs, right? We can bring in all of these elements under one organization, thereby lowering the cost. We create a margin, we can mark it up, and we can sell it. But with the exponential growth in technologies and the law of accelerating returns, those elements are becoming accessible to just about anybody. And now anybody with a new mindset can come in, have access to those same elements, and fundamentally disrupt these corporations who are ill-equipped to react to the rapid technological change that's happening all around them. And so the primary reason that we have these corporate structures, as suggested by Ronald Coase, today has become democratized and accessible widely. So with the exponential rise of technologies, the costs plummeting down to zero, and the markets shifting, I think that we are seeing the end or the radical change to these top-down hierarchical structures that we've become familiar with. And blockchain technology actually allows a new type of organizational model to exist that's known as the Decentralized Autonomous Organization, or DAO. So a DAO is an organization that can exist without managerial hierarchy, but where trust is built into the network, and people can coordinate around shared goals and interests without needing to trust each other or really even needing to know each other. And so now we can have hundreds or thousands or millions of people all over the world coordinating around shared goals and interests. So a DAO does this by distributing risk and reward across the network to incentivize productive activity and penalize malicious or counterproductive activity. Bitcoin could actually be argued to be the prototypical DAO, right? It manages its workforce by continually distributing equity itself, proportional to the work that its miners are doing, which it relies on for the network. And so Bitcoin was able to prove that, or demonstrate, that we could align incentives using software alone. Ethereum took it to a new level, and by providing a new or a more generalized platform, we have the ability to coordinate around goals and interests beyond currency creation. And so I think we're going to see some real profound disruption when you have the rise of these organizations that, I mean, we see it today with the rise of the maker movement, open source software and hardware. And the other aspect to touch on is, I think summed nicely by this quote from Alekis Agonis, who was the original designer of the Mini, the car. And he said, an expert is someone who will tell you exactly how something can't be done. But what we're seeing today is entrepreneurs, communities, and individuals who won't say no. And the reason that this is really profound, as those technologies grow exponentially and the costs drop down to zero, and people can now coordinate around shared goals and interests and have access to all of the same elements that were previously exclusive, you're going to see some really profound change. And it's a mindset shift, and it's really important to innovation, because where the expert may have stopped, these new communities and individuals won't. And so actually, 3.5 years ago, I had the privilege to work and co-found one such community. Back in 2013, Elon Musk open sourced his concept for a new transportation method called the Hyperloop. How many people have heard of the Hyperloop? Awesome, awesome, many. So for those who may not have before, a brief overview. It's a new method of transportation where we have a vehicle that we're levitating off of the ground, so we're eliminating rolling resistance, and then we put that vehicle in a tube or a tunnel, and we can control the environment in that tube or tunnel. So we can optimize it for our purposes, namely, in this case, evacuating most of the air, not all of the air. But we create a partial vacuum there, and we more or less eliminate air resistance. And the result is an energy-elegant electric system that can travel at immense speeds using very little energy. When I say immense speeds, we're talking 1,200 kilometers an hour, which in American is 765 miles per hour. It's just about the speed of sound. And so the idea is to be able to now shrink distances and make these make this travel accessible and convenient, really. We say it's as convenient as a train, but faster than a plane. And so when, several years later, SpaceX and Elon Musk said, we are going to build facilities to test such vehicles at our headquarters in Hawthorne, California, someone from our community made a post and said, I think we have the knowledge and expertise within our group to put forward a compelling vehicle and create a real solution for the challenge that the vehicle would face. And people started to signal their support for the idea and sign up, and we started really modestly with a Google Sheet to sign up, and people would say what their background or what their experience might have been, and volunteer a certain number of hours per week. So this was all done on a volunteer basis. And over 9 months, the group worked together to design a vehicle and solve the challenges of operating in that kind of harsh environment and traveling at those immense speeds. And this was all done virtually. Nobody met online, nobody met in person. And we survived various milestones from SpaceX to where they ultimately selected 150 teams to come and present their designs to a board of SpaceX and Tesla engineers. And 9 of us flew to defend our designs. And that was the first time that anybody in this community had met in person. And we were fortunate enough to be selected from the over 2,000 initial entrants to be one of the 30 to move to manufacture our vehicle and go and test it at the facilities at SpaceX. And that presented a new challenge to us where we had this virtual and distributed team of engineers and designers. Now we actually had to manufacture and produce functional hardware and prototypes. And I think that that was really one of the major achievements from our group, was being able to bridge the virtual to the real world in the same kind of decentralized organization that we used to operate online previously. And so to give a kind of feeling for the work that was going on in the community, I put a short video that I hope I can get to play. There we go.
If you think of how much you can travel in a single day, you can drive, you can take a flight, but there's a limit to that. But if you can change that factor, you can effectively change human lives.
So the Hyperloop is a concept where you have a tube in which you remove most of the air, and inside the tube you have a pod, like an aircraft cabin basically, that is levitating inside the tube, and you shoot that cabin at very high speed.
Really, when you break it down into parts, it's not that daunting. Everybody has their own little specialty, and we're all able to talk with each other pretty easily. That conversation's all had on Slack. You have like basically a distributed network of brains tackling the problem, isolating it, breaking it down to small parts, and then farming those parts out to the rest of us.
Everybody has a piece to the puzzle. We have one guy in China that does amazing design. We have one guy in Alabama that can do aircraft body. I have a guy in Australia that used to do electrical safety critical components.
We are creating a benchmark in how people from all around the world can come together with technologies like Slack and solve any kind of problems you can think of.
So Slack's one of our sponsors. Thank you to Slack. So after a year and a half of working together and little opportunity to meet in person, we were able to build this very complex system. We did it in a unique way as well, where the manufacturing was done in a distributed manner. Components and in some cases entire subsystems were manufactured remotely, and then they were all brought together at an integration and testing lab of ours in Menlo Park. After a year and a half, we were able to a year and a half from the idea of forming a team to work on this to bringing it was a year and a half till we brought the finished first version of the prototype, this was our first one, to SpaceX for testing. And I love this picture because it shows, it was the largest in-person meeting of this team. This was 65 people from 19 different countries who had worked together for almost 2 years and never met in person. Actually, I didn't include a photo of the vehicle because I think the real story and innovation is around the team and the passion and that global pool of talent that we were able to tap into. But for those who are interested, it's about 14 feet long and 5 feet high. And we were able to achieve some firsts in the Hyperloop space and still have publicly demonstrated some of the most advanced technology that's available. So we created this new method of levitation. It's an active magnetic levitation system. I won't get too deep into the details, but if anybody's familiar with maglev trains, they need a certain translational speed before the train will interact with the track and cause it to levitate. Our system, we can turn the vehicle on and it will levitate in place. And we're creating a magnetic field between any conductive subsurface and the engines that we have on the vehicle. So our first prototype had 8 of these engines on it. And then we can actually manipulate that magnetic field and we can induce thrust, braking, and we can control the vehicle in flight. So we were the first to do this and to be able to do it in a vacuum chamber. We were also the first pod, and still the only pod, with a pressure vessel that was tested in that environment at speed and was rated capable of sustaining human life. So I could have sat in the vehicle and survived a run down the track. And we also believe it's the first engineering system that was entirely designed and manufactured by a crowd. And of course, after then a year and a half, we were able to show the work that we had done to the man who had initially open sourced the idea, Elon Musk there. On the far left is Tom Lambo, our lead engineer. I'm hovering over his shoulder, and beside him is Steve Davis, who's the Director of Advanced Projects at SpaceX and has been leading the Boring Company, if anybody's familiar with that. And so today, our organization generally, we focus on developing and launching innovative technologies that can have a real impact in the world. Today, we're over 1,300 people in 59 countries, millions of messages exchanged, millions of hours of design and manufacturing, and all of this was done at a cost of 0. This was us lowering the cost of supply. In our case, the supply is the knowledge and expertise amongst our community of passionate and educated individuals. We've won multiple awards and we have multiple projects in development. We are using blockchain technology actually to measure and track contributions along the creation chain, as well as to secure and manage intellectual property or other assets that are created along the way. And so we have multiple projects that we're working on. We still work on the Hyperloop. We're working on a full-scale version. We're working with multiple governments to do feasibility studies and establish regulations that are logical but don't impede the innovation in general. We're working on a personal flight device as well as unmanned flight devices, largely for search and rescue applications, but we do actually have a version as well that's focused on delivery. We have a huge aerospace background, and so there's a lot of projects that we're working on in space, from satellites to rockets to novel means of propulsion for rockets. And we also have a project that we call rBridge. It's a way to formalize that distributed manufacturing process that we use for many of our projects. And so now with all of this coming together, currently we have approximately 3 billion people in the world who are online. And that number is expected to grow to 5 billion in the next 2 years. That's 2 billion more minds that we will have access to and who will be able to access the wealth of information on the internet. And so if you can tap into that immense knowledge and information, just imagine what you might be able to achieve. And what would you achieve if you could tap into that global pool of talent and resources? And so there was an image of our Hyperloop pod here, but it's vanished mysteriously. But I thank you very much for your time, and I hope you've had a wonderful time at the event here. And I hope you'll visit us and check out some of the awesome work that our community is doing. Thank you.